Ba, the honourable member for Markham-Unionville.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to share my time with my colleague from Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel. And I'd like to begin where I left off on my question to the previous speaker, and that's the point that the thesis of my remarks is that the proposition put forward by the government is fundamentally flawed and illogical. And so let me begin by stating what their proposition is, and then I want to explain why I claim it to be flawed and illogical. The government claims that the purpose of the temporary foreign worker program is to provide only temporary work and only where there is extreme labor shortage. And then they talk as if they're suddenly surprised. Whoops, there's a problem out there. We have 340,000 temporary foreign workers, and in 2006 we only had 140,000. And then they announced reforms as of this budget. But that makes no sense because this surge in temporary foreign workers was in fact a deliberate creation of this government since they came into power in 2006. Since that time, we've gone from 140,000 to 340,000 over a period of, unfortunately 7 long years of Conservative government. And it's over that time that they have deliberately caused that number to grow exponentially. And it's not as if they weren't warned earlier. They were taken to task by the Auditor General in 2009. And what did they do? They expressed concern. They said they would review. They said this a number of times. But nothing has changed. So my point is that this is not a problem that the Conservatives have just discovered. This is a problem that they have deliberately created since they came to office.
This is not a problem we've just discovered. This is a problem that the Conservatives created deliberately since they became the government.
I note that even though that the numbers have gone from 140,000 to 338,000, that might be explainable if we had a sudden drop in unemployment and increase in labor shortages. But in fact, the unemployment rate today is higher than it was in 2006, and the overall vacancy rate in the economy, according to Bank of Canada figures, is approximately the same as it has been on average over the past 20 years. So the next question is, if the Conservatives deliberately created this crisis over the last 7 years, why and how? And I think to answer that question, we need a little bit of historical perspective. The temporary foreign worker program was brought in many, many years ago by a Liberal government, and in my opinion, if properly managed, it's a very good and very valuable program. But the way it was managed under Liberal governments was that we had to achieve a balance between the interests of employers, the interests of Canadian workers, and the interests of foreign workers. As long as you maintain that balance across these three groups, it's a very successful program. So in terms of Canadian workers, you had to make sure that those workers had first call on available jobs, which this government self-evidently has failed to achieve. In terms of the temporary foreign workers, you had to make sure that they were treated fairly, that they were subject to the same laws as other Canadian workers. But this government has violated that because now, under certain circumstances, temporary foreign workers can get paid 15% less than the going wage. Right. And thirdly, you have to look after the interests of employers, because in certain circumstances and in certain sectors, like agriculture, for example, there are clearly labor shortages. There are clearly some jobs that cannot be filled by Canadians, and there is a clear need for temporary foreign workers. So as long as you manage the system in a balanced way, respecting the interests of all of those three groups, it's a good program. The problem with the Conservatives, and the reason since they came to power in 2006, the program has become a big mess, is that they no longer had a balanced approach. They gave all the weight to the employers and none of the weight to the Canadian and foreign workers. So they just listened to employers, they turned a blind eye, they turned their back on stuff so that employers could get whatever they wanted. I don't blame the employers. Employers are out there to make money. And if the government turns a blind eye and lets them covertly do what they're not really supposed to do, a lot of companies will do it. The problem is the administration by the government of the system. So I don't blame companies for taking advantage of deliberate government laxness. I blame the government for creating that laxness in the first place, for deliberately building up these numbers to unprecedented levels, and for totally disrespecting the rights of Canadian and foreign workers. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think I have a little bit more time. There are a couple of other issues I'd like to mention. Just first of all, in terms of the influx unwarranted of these foreign workers, I have a high-tech riding, and I've received letters from a number of my constituents who work in the tech sector, and I just want to quote from one of my constituents who wrote to me as follows. These Indian multinational companies are proving to immigration that skills are not available, but this is not true. All the skills are available in abundance locally, and it's only the work of the immigration lawyers who cook the application to make it look like the skills are not available. And the government allows these immigration lawyers to get these phony stories in and immediately allows these foreign workers in to displace people like my Canadian constituent in Markham. There's also the question of immigration through landed immigrants, where one ultimately becomes a citizen and raises one's family in this country, versus immigration, temporary immigration through temporary foreign workers, or what are sometimes called guest workers in certain European countries. And I think we in the Liberal Party have a preference for the first category of immigration. We think the way to build our country is to bring people in from foreign lands, let them settle here, let them become citizens, let them raise a family. We acknowledge, yes, temporary foreign workers have an important role. But the fact that these temporary foreign workers have gone from up to 340,000, which is more than the annual intake of regular immigrants, is not good for the structure of immigration for this country. And as I said earlier, that is a deliberate plan by the Conservatives to create this situation. Et le point final, ce n'est pas...
And the final point is it's not a good thing for the poorest countries worldwide. Because what happens is, if poor countries such as Bangladesh, for example, import things from countries like China or India, given that China and India must pay higher tariffs now, the things that they export to Bangladesh must now be subject to more tariffs.
It's not only penalizing China and India, but it's also penalizing the very poorest countries of the world. So for all of these reasons, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I would just like to say that the Conservative government's explanation is totally illogical, that this is not a problem they have just discovered. It is a problem they have deliberately created over their period in office, and they've deliberately created because they've given zero weight to Canadian and foreign workers and all the weight to the companies. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The honourable member for Davenport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important to remember that many temporary foreign workers could have, in a previous era in Canadian history, become permanent residents. And we've always said that temporary foreign workers who come into this country should be accorded that opportunity. This government has let immigrants down time and time again. In Toronto, you have taxi drivers with PhDs in civics who can't get a job because companies aren't recognizing their work experience. And then at the same time, these same companies are bringing in temporary foreign workers. So what's actually happening is Canadian citizens are their own credentials aren't being recognized while we bring in temporary foreign workers. It's also important that we underline the fact that while we have serious issues with this program, we stand for the protection of rights for all workers in Canada, whether they're temporary foreign workers, whether they're permanent residents, or whether they're citizens of this country. We'd like to see them all, if they choose to, become active and contributing members of our country. But what I want to ask the honourable member of the Liberal Party is how is it that we could have in Toronto tens of thousands of immigrants with highly skilled qualifications, and they cannot find jobs that are obviously available?
The honourable member for Markham-Unionville.
Well, there is much with which I agree with my colleague on. I certainly believe that all workers, whether foreign or Canadian, should be treated with fairness. That was a point I made in my speech. I also believe that it should be far easier for temporary workers to get on a path to permanent immigrant status and citizenship. A very small fraction of these temporary foreign workers achieve that permanent status, and that is because of the administration of the program by this government, which is barring those people from permanent citizenship. And finally, I think the member talked about people with credentials having problems. Yes, that has been an issue for many years, but I would simply point out that the determination of rules on credentials is up to provincial governments.
Questions and comments? Question and commentaire. The honourable member for Thunder Bay, Superior North.
The honourable member raised a lot of good points, but I was surprised that he didn't focus a bit more on what for me is the biggest issue here. Yes, it does sometimes make sense to have a temporary foreign worker program in certain areas where there are acute shortages. But why 15% less? And to quote, in contradiction to what has been stated across the aisle, to quote the original statement a year ago about this change in the program, not only talked about 15% less than the market average, but, quote, substantially less than Canadians, close quote. I wish that the honourable member here would share his thoughts on how he feels about this race to the bottom internationally to discount what's already a low minimum wage in large parts of Canada.
The honourable member for Markham-Unionville.
I thank my colleague for his question. Perhaps I wasn't totally clear, but I think I stated in my speech that I agreed with him. Yeah. Because what I said is that under the Liberal government, we had a balanced approach which protected the rights of Canadian workers, foreign workers, and companies. And so we naturally oppose a system where temporary foreign workers can, in certain circumstances, be paid 15% less than their Canadian counterparts. So I agree with him on that point.
Very good. Questions and comments? The honourable member for Scarborough-Guildwood. We do not have a lot of time, so a short question, short answer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to share with colleagues and with my colleague from Markham this email which says, I work in IT for CIBC, where the displacement of full-time employees by onshore foreign workers is completely out of control. She goes on to say, as in the RBC case, these employees had trained foreign workers to do their jobs before they were let go. Once again, these foreign workers are no better trained and do not have any more skills than full-time employees they've displaced. I'd be interested in the honourable member's comments on that email.
The honourable member for Markham-Unionville. 30 seconds, please.
I read out a quote from one of my constituents, very similar to that, who worked in the high-tech sector and said something very similar to your correspondent. So I've been exposed to the same views, and I'm telling you that, telling you through the speaker, that I think that the program has to be fixed up in a major way, and I think it's the government's fault for running it in a lax way for the last 7 years, and it's way too late for them to think it's just a problem beginning now. They should have done this at least back in 2009 when the Auditor General came out with the HERA report, if not before.